You just earned your pay for the week, Manuel. So thank you again. And so this is another of a series of meetings we've been having together with Alvin Mbola, an economist based in Nairobi, who's been talking with us about alternative approaches to development, and particularly as that applies to the response to the pandemic and how we might address the economic consequences, the longer term development consequences, while at the same time continuing to do some of the relief and pandemic containment work that is underway. And we've been talking specifically with the coalition in Cameroon. That is a partnership of MICA and the National Alliance in Cameroon. And they have been participating in these meetings and have incorporated these discussions into their strategies in Cameroon. And specifically, Andre's not with us right now. If you're in Australia, this is a terrible time to have to get up and do a meeting. But Philemon and Jean Leboum and others in the coalition did have a workshop with Andre focusing on the identification of local community assets. And then from that work together to modify their strategies for Cameroon. And they'll tell you a little bit more about that and the plan then that they have put together. And so our aim for this meeting is that they would talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they see in applying this locally. And we'll see how we do as far as the group of us being a resource to them and talking with them about some of those challenges. And then what I want to see going forward is how this works in terms of the group in Cameroon taking our feedback and suggestions, working with those, and then the future coming back again, talk with us about what worked, what challenges continue, and see going forward if in a sense we can be an international support group to their local work in Cameroon, and hopefully we all learn together in terms of how to take these concepts and apply them locally. So we got a few more folks have joined us. And hello, we just introduced the meeting, and I'm about to hand off to Philemon or Jean Leboum. I'm not sure which of you wants to start out and just kind of catch up the group in terms of your modified plan that you developed after meeting with Andre.
Philemon, you can handle the question.
Okay, thank you. Greetings to everybody and welcome. It's a pleasure to be with us all on the platform. As Dave said, we have been discussing for a while, wanting to do something about COVID, but before COVID, we had started discussion with Dave and others, trying to see how to get the church in Cameroon work together and do many things. The specific training we had with Andre sometime, I think it was the 7th of this month, was very, very pertinent because it helped us to understand or to have a greater understanding of what we could do in trying to identify the needs within our community and then to see how to reach out to the needs and also how to reach out in reality, not only identifying the need, but also identifying resources within the community which we could use. So it was very helpful because even in terms of worldview, it changed a lot of how we looked at things before then and gave us more hope, more optimism. You know, it's very easy to see problems more than you see possibilities, but we're able to look at possibilities much more than problems after that. So that definitely had an influence on our plan, because before then we were focusing much more on the relief, trying to help people struggling with the aftermath of COVID and also help people struggling with the aftermath of internal displacement, because as some of you may know, Cameroon has been at a civil war, if I can call it. The English-speaking Cameroon and government, if I can say so. And many people were displaced from the English-speaking part of the nation and came to Yaoundé and other big cities. And that, of course, led us, therefore, to think about what to do to meet the needs of those people and to move ahead with them. But after discussing with Andre in the training, we decided that we will not only be working in terms of trying to do relief, but we also need to move to work for sustainable solutions, identifying resources from our own community and meeting our needs in a more sustainable way. So that is the major adjustments that we did. So yes, we still have to try to do something about the relief effort because there are many people who are struggling with life after COVID and with life, I'm saying after COVID. COVID is not yet over. There are people struggling with life as a result of the effects of COVID, and there are people struggling with life as a result of their being internally displaced and living in cities where they really are new. In fact, yesterday, I watched a news item that was very, very disheartening because some of these people came from
Philemon froze up for me. I assume for you too. We'll give him a moment, see if that connection comes back.
Hello, Ben Victor, can you add something while we are still waiting for Philemon to come back? Ben Victor.
Yeah. Ben Victor, or maybe Jean Leboom, if you want to fill in for Philemon for a moment.
Ben Victor.
While we're waiting for Philemon to reconnect, I had the opportunity to speak with the group after their training with Andre. One of the things that I thought was interesting goes to one of the questions we want to talk about, which is how the church understands community. And I thought it was very
Sorry,
interesting.
my network went off.
Oh, there you are.
You can go ahead, Dave. I can hear you.
Oh, I'll just quickly finish
Somehow
that
I
thought,
went
and
off.
maybe you could speak to that. But they shared with me that when they began the workshop, and I forget the exact number, but there was some large number of church leaders participating with the coalition. One of the first questions that came up is, what is our community? And I thought that was really interesting and spoke to really getting the theology aligned as you are working with the church leaders, engaging the community, even around these basic issues of, is the community just the church? Is it a collection of churches? Is it only the faithful? You know, what is that? And I found that very thought-provoking that the group began with that. So I just wanted to interject that while we're giving you a chance to reconnect.
Okay, thank you. I was just telling a story of an unfortunate situation where somebody just came and got more than 500 families evicted from a piece of land. So gendarmes and police came in there the last 2 days and have been, forcefully getting them out of the piece of land so that this particular individual can possess it. And it's been quite unfortunate. Anyway, so those are just some of the issues that are surrounding our need for the relief effort. But as I said, we definitely want to go beyond the relief and talk about how to do a sustainable kind of help meeting in our community. And Dave has just highlighted one of the things that we think is very crucial, understanding community. That looks like a simple thing, but it is not that simple, because sometimes when you talk about community, what does it mean? Are we talking about members of the church? Are we talking about people living around the church? How does the church even act as a catalyst within its own community to identify and work on difficulties that are there so that we can find solutions. So we trust that in the near future, we want to be more involved in doing sustainable development. And one of those things we want to do also is helping the churches around to have a better understanding of what community is, have a better understanding on how the church can be a catalyst in development around the community, and have an understanding of how the churches, even within the community, can work together. Because having one church having an influence in the community will not be enough. And so to be able to have a little bit of an economies of scale, we need that synergy of many churches working together within the community to mobilize, to catalyze, to identify needs, and to work together with the community in doing that. So those are some of the major things that we are looking forward to doing. I'm seeing Ben Victor there, and he can surely add some of the things that I have left out. Ben Victor, are you there?
Thank you. Yes, okay. I'm here. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, just like he's saying, we started off by saying, okay, we want to do relief. Maybe get the churches come together and intervene in the immediate to respond to what is happening. But then we think this also is an opportunity for us to think in the long term. And thinking in the long term, we need to think holistically. How do we engage in church and community mobilization so that we're not just kind of solving a problem and creating another one? And by so doing, deal with the issue of dependence. Before the pandemic, we are going through a civil war that has been for about 3 years now. And this actually has revealed the weakness of the church. The church is handicapped. All the church can do is pray. There is no community action. There is no advocacy because everybody seems to be afraid. So we feel if all of this is over, the war is over, and then the pandemic and all of that, there will be serious issues in the community. And while we are thinking of empowering the church, we are thinking of empowering the church with a view of taking their eyes from within the four walls and putting those eyes in the community, because the church is within the community. And we believe that church growth and community development go hand in hand. So these are the issues we are trying to look at. But then we do not have, first of all, what I will say, the capacity to do that, because our gospel for more than 70 years now, since the church has been around in the country, is the gospel of the soul being saved and going to heaven. Now, people have not gone to heaven immediately they get saved. They are hungry, they need shelter, they need many other things around them. How do we help them to be able to do that? Not just the members of the church, like we're talking about what is a community, who is this community? Is it just the four walls of the building? So how do we do this in a sustainable way? These are some of the issues that we are grappling with, and we are hoping that we can have a conversation and maybe some case studies, and that can be of help.
And then maybe just to add a statement to what he has said is then how do we work with international community, international bodies or NGOs to be able to do the things that we are talking about? How do we get engaged? How do we discuss? How do we create the partnership and work it out in a way that it's synergy and it's assistance for us to be able to accomplish what we have just been discussing? Thank you.
So the two key questions so far that have come out of your work, one is, how do we get across to churches this greater sense of community, their relationship to the larger community and the role they can play, not just that they have an opportunity to help, but also as a demonstration of their faith and a demonstration of the work of the Spirit in the community through the church. And exactly. How do you begin to get that on get churches on board with that? And then secondly, is there a role for the international community? Can people as represented by the group here in some way support you in that? And we're interested to see Philemon and Ben Victor and all, if you have some ideas about what that support might look like, but also from this group and the experience that many people have here doing international work, what could the international community do to facilitate some of the things you're doing? If I may take 1 second, I'd like to back you up just briefly, Philemon, because you began by saying that the workshop changed your worldview, if I heard that right, or
Yes.
introduced a different worldview. Could you just say a little bit more about that? I'm interested in how did that change? What is that worldview change?
You know, before the workshop, what was happening is that we had a very pessimistic view of community development. And it was like we saw our communities as being too poor to do anything. So we needed to reach out, and thinking about community development was like get somebody to write a project, then take that project, send it out, look for some NGOs to sponsor it, you know, which is like the old model of development where there is a top-down approach, and those who are involved just sit and watch, and they bring the things and feed them like some helpless babies. But what we realized was that in as much as the communities look very needy, there are things within that community, there are people within the community, there are stakeholders within the community whom we just need to talk to, we need to identify, we need to reach out to, and help them even to see the need, to see the possibilities of what can be done to overcome those needs, and to get them involved in doing it. So that if we are to get an international community, it should be one that comes in to assist, not one that comes in to do the things for us, but one that comes in to meet us at the point where we are unable to go on, or where we actually need that external help to be able to go on. So that it's not a totally dependent model, but it's a synergistic model, a participatory model in which whoever comes in to work with us who are at work and not sitting with an expected mindset or expectation mindset.
And you presented this view. You presented this view to the participants in your workshop, and beyond the initial question, what is community? How did they react to what you just shared?
They were excited. They were like, I remember one of them who said, wow, this is serious. This is important. This is what we need. And one of the immediate reactions was, let's get it out so that the rest of the church leaders and the pastors who are not with us will understand this model so that we can work on it. Let me say something personal. I was a little bit embarrassed because before we had that meeting, I had been involved in some community development at the level of the village and at the level of some government setup or government institution that was involved with development in the village. And what they did was come to the village, get us to define the major problem that we had, which was water. We didn't have drinking water. And they told us, okay, what can you do? What can you contribute before we back you up? I will say, okay, we don't have money, but we can produce you the stones. We can dig it out. We can produce the sand, and every labor that you need, we'll be able to give it to you. Then you give us the money to buy the cement and pay for the technical work, and get us a solar panel so that we have the energy to pump the water to the tank and distribute it to the community. And that's the way we did it. But somehow I never thought about that in terms of church. So it was, I think it was some good eye-opening to us to see that the model for community development has changed, and we need to get to that new model to be able to do things.
Very
good. Another thing too is that helps us to understand that you need to understand there is a need for the understanding of what the role of what the church is and what the role of the church is in the community. Because most of the time, we see that we have been made to understand that the church is supposed to stay off the public square and gather within a particular building and just pray and worship. And so whatever goes on in the community is not the responsibility of the church. And so because of that understanding of what the church is actually affecting how we view church and how we do church within the larger community. So this is why we are actually asking, how do we do, first of all, have the understanding of what the church is, what is the role of the church in the community, and how do we now as a church operate within the larger community, pulling the different stakeholders together to see that what goes on in the community is actually the concern of everybody, whether you are in the church or you are out of the church. These are some of the issues we're trying to wrestle with.
That's a big theological issue that, you know, if you do not have the base and you don't establish the paradigm well, you started, it doesn't go. So that that theological base is very important. Understanding what the church is and the role of the church in the community.
Well, that's a good introduction, and welcome, Alvin. Good to see you with us today. And let me throw this out to the group and to Alvin. If you have follow-up questions for Philemon, Ben Victor, or Jean Lebaume, or just any comments on what you've heard so far.
David, the question that's coming to me is the question that Jesus posed to Simon Peter in Matthew 16, where he asks him, "Who do you say that I am?" And I wonder if the church is looking at itself as both community-based and a house of worship. If it would be important to understand the perspective of how the community views the church. Not just how the church views the community. And maybe we need to be asking in subtle terms, or what does the community think of the church? Who do they say that we are? Because we can reach out, but their ability to connect and for that synergy to take place is also their ability to trust what they see and what they hear and what they know.
Yes, thoughtful as always, Christine. Very good. Yeah.
I think that let me just cue to say that is important, because in our context, I've realized that sometimes when the church shows up, people are either threatened. We are a very cultural people. Culture is very deep in Africa. And sometimes when the church shows up, they're coming to challenge us. They're coming to touch our culture. So that view of church is something important. But I think that the negative view of church by the community stems from what the church has not done over the years, by the church not being engaged with the community as part of the community, but standing there like an isolated entity in which, if you are in the community, you dissect yourself from the community and come in there because you want to go to heaven. That kind of picture that the church gave to the community also skewed the minds of how the community viewed the church. So one way to help community have a better view of the church is, I think, being engaged in what we are saying in church, being involved with the community in the development and the solving of community problems. That will surely change the way the community views the church. Because I think it's the church that has to define itself to the community. Otherwise, the community cannot understand what the church is.
Yes, that's something that I would like to build on. Christine, your statement I like, and David, I don't know if you want me to evolve a little bit more on what I wrote into the chat box there. Because theologically, I feel like what you're describing there is stemming out of the Reformation and Luther, separating the church and the state affairs. So we have two worlds, and then with Lausanne in the 70s, we have even still built on that. We have a social action and we have an evangelism, but David Bosch brought it back together. So we have a different question on the table, I feel like. Looking at what is the community brings us back to this. We are the church, and what is the community? And I feel the question that you just raised there, Philemon, isn't it the question, what is the church and what is her mission? Because I also would say the church has lost its mission, and that is not just happening in Cameroon. Same here in Canada. I sit here in that building. It's an empty building now. So the question is really, how can this church here serve that community? Has this church here also not lost its calling, being ecclesia, being called out? And I think that's, Christine, what you're mentioning there, the question of the missional church. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. So who are we? Is the question to me, because if we haven't found our identity first, we are looking at the community, telling us who we are. But hasn't God told us who we are as children of God, as a holy nation, a holy priesthood that has the responsibility to serve God and represent the people, but also speak to the people what God said? And so for me, it's kind of like the question, what would it be doing church the Jesus way? And from there, like, what has Jesus given us as gifts to the church, material, social, intellectual, and spiritual gifts? And then we know who we are. And then we can, as church, bring in those NGOs, and, you know, we become a community player. We are God's agents of transformation. That is the church. And the NGO can be invited as a partnership. And I think NGOs became big. Micah was developed because the church has lost its calling. So I feel like Micah, it's a wonderful network, but it's a kind of like a response how the church stepped out of, we are the church, this is the community, and suddenly NGOs, Christian NGOs, Micah stepped in and said, this is where we should connect.
Other thoughts, comments?
Hello?
Apologies for coming in late. Caught up somewhere. So I've been trying to get the gist of the discussions, and I think very interesting things. I think I borrow quite a lot from what Manuela said. And when we had this discussion, or when we started to work with especially Islam communities almost 15 years ago, there were a lot of discussions of what is church, what is community. And a week or two to discuss it from different angles, economic, theological, sociology, and all that kind of stuff. But I think Manuela said basically most of the things which I wanted to say, but I want to take it into the practical side and ask it in terms of a question. But even before I say that, my perception is that the church belongs to a community. The church doesn't belong to a denomination, because that's where we always mess up first. And so we had that issue, especially in the crisis we had in Kenya, where you went to places, there was a crisis, people burnt the church and threw away any small piece which could be left of the church. But in certain places, they shielded and protected the church, even people who never went to that specific church. So that helped us to realize that it is important if the people own the church, whether they come into that church or they don't come into that church, because the community owns the church and not the other way around. And therefore, the question always is the church, is your church, the question I used to ask many pastors is, when I did training, is your church a church to the community, a church for the community, or a church with the community? And for me, the most critical thing is that the church cannot be 2 or 4. The church must be with the community. It is a community resource, whether the people come to that specific church or they don't come to that church. the people must have a feeling that the church exists here. Because again, lifestyle evangelism becomes stronger in communities because the church is exposing its life missiologically to the community than just say, come to the Lord. Because many people have heard, as it's always said, many people have heard about the gospel, but not many people have seen the gospel. So the gospel need to be seen in the community. It simply means word and deed must go hand in hand. Oftentimes it's all about word. And the other thing is you also have what you'd call, I used to call them, for lack of a better word, where everybody from a specific church comes from outside of a community. So a church is implanted in a community, but everybody who comes to it comes from a different community altogether. And there's always trouble around that specific arrangement. So for me, the most critical thing is, does the church belong to the community? And there's a circle we used to draw, a small circle which represents the church and a big circle outside which represents the community, simply meaning that the church belongs to the community, not to a denomination, not to an individual, okay? Because it's been here for 2,000 years, it's bound to be here for another. We will pass away, our denominations will pass away, but the church must remain owned by a community for it to be effective. Yeah, so that's my immediate observation, even as I try to listen into the other things which were discussed before I came in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. And I think that Ben Victor and Philemon and others were then asking the application question that comes from that. Given what all of you have just described, then how do they begin to convey that or demonstrate that in the community? So as they look at doing kind of a hybrid relief and development work in a target community, which I think is part of their strategy, let's focus on one or a few communities and begin this work. Is it just a matter of having a lecture, holding a workshop? How do they begin to do this and change how the church and the community understand one another?
I could give a quick example, just drawing from what has been done with different churches in the past. It might not be contextually relevant, but oftentimes what happens is, how does the church demonstrate love to the community, whether those people come to that church or not? And one of the practical ways is for a specific church in a specific community to dig deeper first into his or herself in terms of what it has as a resource. And the resource oftentimes is not necessarily money, especially when you think about smallness of engaging with communities. Said that we worked with churches in the past, and a church would decide that we are going to demonstrate love to this community by collecting trash, mobilizing our church members, mobilizing the community. We go around, collect trash, put it together, and put it into the right place. You start demonstrating love by using those simple, basic things instead of starting at a higher level. Oftentimes, you start at a higher level, people separate and divorce themselves from the church, so that you have what I think Manuel was saying, in other words, that the dichotomy has remained real, so that people know the church as a place where we dwell on spiritual issues. Physical issues are left to some guys. But the church was meant to do all these things together. I know we lost it at some point, which is a historical thing which I don't want to get into. But demonstrating love simply means, what is the simplest thing you can be able to do? If you go to farming communities, let's say in Cameroon, you could get situations whereby maybe people allocate themselves the responsibility to go dig one person's farm, then we move to another person's farm, then you move to another person's farm, and the same things happen in harvesting time. That doesn't require a resource or a lot of money from a church. The church starts endearing itself and demonstrating love into the community. If we can mobilize ourselves and say, today we are going to help so and so dig his farm, if he has 2 acres or 3 acres, and we do it in 2 hours, 3 hours. After that, our fellowship, pray together and go. The next day, do it with another guy. The next day, do it with another guy. So you have practical things, but starting it small and at our level. that helps to start building critical mass. But if you wait for the big things, it's difficult.
Then Alvin and Andre, you may have a comment about this also. And Deborah, I'll be quick. Excuse me. But then is that the connection to identifying local community assets, which is, as the church is demonstrating love in the community, they need to see the assets that are available to them within the community that they can then leverage in service to the community. So is that where we're going in tying these things together?
I think for me, and I haven't heard the whole conversation, so please forgive me. The showing love in the community it can still be kind of a veiled or disguised kind of we're coming in as the saviors kind of kind of approach. Where I wonder whether another way of looking at it, and I think love is the right way, is the right language, but how do we actually sit with the community? And because I love what you're saying, Alvin, I think the with the community is absolutely right. And so for being with the community, we sit with the community, we talk with the community, together we come and recognize the strengths that are already there. Because we tend to come with this dichotomy, here we are as the church, and here the community is. I don't see that dichotomy. I think the church is part of the community. And so together we need to come and discover what the assets are in the community and then build on those strengths together to see the whole community move forward. It's got to be a partnership approach right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Deborah?
Yeah, thank you. Building on that, really what Andre was saying, I must just preface my remarks by saying I'm not familiar with the Cameroon context. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa, but we have here a 79% declared Christian population. You know, one has to question the depth of that belief and its activity. But what it basically means is that the community is present in the churches very much of the time. And so some of the approaches that we are trying to use is to work with the community as they are found in the churches. A small example would be in working with early life and helping to support pregnant women and so forth. It's about capacitating and helping those who are already present in the church and then giving them the skills to go and move out into the community. The problem we have is that the churches don't have the skills to equip people in these particular areas, whatever it happens to be. And that's when you get your Christian development organizations, your NGOs coming in supposedly from the outside to try and equip the church. And they come up against all sorts of resistances there. And of course, the other problem is the people who've gone outside to start those NGOs did so because it couldn't be accommodated within the church. So there does need to be some broader conversation about two things really. One is, how do you work with the community as they are already present in your congregations? And how do we build those relationships between congregations and Christian development organizations where we start to see ourselves as missional communities with different roles to play side by side under this mission of God?
I'd like to speak up. I've been involved, this is Tom Carell, working in similar investments areas in Uganda. I think the first definition that we come to is we have to define who is our community. Is it the neighborhood, as we talked about earlier? Could be the church as far as that's concerned, but who is our community? Then that community needs to take ownership for the development. They need to define not, what are the first things they want to work on, how do they want to come back with development, then go find resources, which can be the church, it can be the NGO, it can be the government, as far as that's concerned. But the community has to drive the endeavor, and they also have to look at what do I have in my hand. And again, as earlier speaker said, church is clearly should be one of those things that are in our hand. I think it's a starting phase. The church can be the catalyst. Individuals in the church can be the catalyst for helping the community come to grips with the problem, but the community has to own the solution. Otherwise you get relief.
Yeah, it's good, Tom.
I think you and I are speaking the same thing, basically.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I resonate. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
David, could I suggest that possibly the biggest asset of the church, which is the one that it practices the least, is the desire to listen. And so we think of a contextualization and then we export it out into the community without having known the stories of the community, without giving people the benefit of feeling, of knowing they have been listened to. And so the church is full of words, ideas, and it finds it very difficult to sit with others and not even do anything. But maybe the biggest gift we can give is do nothing and listen. And that begins to build a relationship. But it's hard to build a relationship with one person speaking only.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. It's good.
Can I say something?
Please.
I am thinking that I'm trying to define, you're talking and I'm trying in my brains to define our community. And it looks to me like presently, the community that we need to define to be able to move forward with what we are trying to do is itself the church in Cameroon as the community. Because what we are saying is that we need to do a theological reflection that helps the churches or the church leaders or pastors to understand what community is and how to be engaged in it as a project, if I can use that word, or as a process, rather than as a bigger project and a bigger process than what we are having in mind of going and meeting the needs of the IDPs, the internally displaced people, and people struggling with COVID. So we have two things here. One is using community resources and community resource owners and mobilizing the people within the community to work with them to meet the needs of those who have been affected by COVID and to meet the needs of those who have been displaced internally. That is one thing. But in a more durable way, is reaching out to the church itself, the few of us who have been involved in our discussion, and convincing them with the newness of what we received from Andre, the new thought of the fact that the church is supposed to be catalyst, but partner to community in terms of giving them the new, new theology of community and understanding of community from a biblical point of view, so that the larger church can be involved in community transformation. So I think I'm seeing two things here that probably, if we address them as those two separate things, it might make it easier for us. One, the reaching out with this kind of relief situation for the present people who are struggling with COVID and internationally displaced. And then two, for a longer process, a longer sustainable thinking, reaching out to the church and help them to have a new way of seeing community so that they can be involved in development within their community. I don't know if I've dissected it well or defined it clearly or what, I don't know.
I wonder, Philemon, whether one way to look at it would be, if we want to reach out to the church, one of the best ways to do that, I think, is with an example. And so it's with a story. And so my thought would be, let's find some low-hanging fruit. Let's find a church or a community where we could start doing some of these things. and then the momentum of that will become a story that can then be shared with others, and it can grow kind of organically, rather than it being just a theory that's taken and then tried to explain the theory and that sort of thing. If we get a practical example or two happening, then I think that's going to be a really powerful kind of story to be able to then share with others, to bring them on board with the whole process.
Preach it. That's been our in Uganda. We haven't talked about the church. We've talked about churches and communities, small or isolated community. You're 2,000 people or less. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, what I think now, like Philemon is trying to say, there are two things we are looking at. Now, we have a unique context. I know that, the whole understanding of the church has lost its place in so many places. Now, we cannot engage church and community together if the church has not had time to reflect theologically to understand who the church is and what is the role of the church. Because if you have to bring the community, first of all, we are talking about the larger community of people who have nothing to do with church, and they know church as maybe one group of people who are there to judge people and tell people a kind of whistleblowers, moral whistleblowers in the community, and doing nothing there. But there is a need for, first of all, the church to sit back and ask questions, reflect on them theologically. And it's a process, I think, it's a process of a kind of having a conversation, the church having a conversation with itself. And it may begin with maybe 2-3 churches within a community and ask them, say, why are we here? What is our role? Who are we? And all of that. And then now that we understand who we are, we now can engage community in a conversation and see how we can do that together. But if you have to carry the church and immerse the church in a larger community, the aspect of theological reflection will be completely put out, because it might be an issue. I don't know whether that is the issue.
Well, if I may, for the last part of our time, shift the focus just a bit. Ben-Victor, Philemon, Jean Leboom, your role is to take this and translate it into action. And so if we were to say tomorrow, you're going to take this conversation and put it to work somewhere in Cameroon, what do you anticipate would be the challenges you would run into when you actually went to take these ideas and apply them in a community?
Good question.
The first challenge is getting the churches, a few churches within a community, to come together. It's easy to bring the church together for prayers, but when it has to do with responding, we had that experience. Now, when we started with a 3-point agenda. The first agenda was, okay, we are going to mobilize the church to pray, and realized that we had more people in attendance in the platform each time when we were planning that for prayers. I mean, the mobilization was great. The moment we ended with prayers, I was okay, now there is a need for us to respond. We have not had sometimes more than 10 people in a meeting, but we used to have 20 people, 30 people attend meetings, and we have this conversation when it has to do with prayer. And after the 20th of May, when prayers were done, that's okay, now let's look at issues now. Let's see how we can respond. The number did drop to about, sometimes we are 7, sometimes we are 6, sometimes we are 9. So that's the first challenge we face.
And how do you understand that change? Why is it that people leave when the prayer is finished? What's the barrier there, Ben-Victor?
I think just we have to engage. Yeah, go on.
Go on.
Yeah, I think if we can get the church to come together and start by reflecting on these, we might, maybe that might be an entry point. Yeah, help the church understand that, yeah, prayer is okay. It's okay for us to pray. We need prayer in the beginning. We need prayer in the end. But between now, while we pray, there is supposed to be some kind of engagement. We need to reach out. We need to be out there. We need to be, Jesus was not in the temple. He was out there with the people. And It should not just be a kind of a project we want to engage in. It's a process. We are working with the community, but we need to understand who we are and why we are doing this.
So you're suggesting to us that that engagement begins with your building a relationship across the churches, letting them get to know you, you getting to know them, and that relationship then sets the stage for further engagement. Am I saying that correctly?
Please,
We are working on that.
By listening, I came late, but by listening, it seems that the church is different of community. Is it that? Because for me, I think church and community are the same. Because many communities can be identified within the church. And when we are saying that we bring the church to do something, and then the church will go and meet community. So it could be something maybe difficult. I think I will join the meeting with the meeting of tomorrow with Philemon, Ben Victor, and Reverend Liken to contribute.
Votre deuxième nom, s'il vous plaît, Jules?
My name is Jules, means motto.
No, I mean the second name. I want to write Jules is not enough.
My name is Motto.
Okay,
M-O-T-O.
sorry. Okay, I know you. It's okay.
W-T-O.
Ça va. Okay, thank you.
Philemon, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Do you want me to call you for?
Yeah.
Philemon is okay.
Could I say something with regards to what Jean Lebon was saying? Drawing from our experiences in the past is that definitely whenever you'd call for prayers, you'll always have huge numbers. And rightfully so, because of the orientation and the training of the pastors. So when you start engaging in active involvement, many people shy away from what they don't know. So your numbers are always bound to drop. But what I would say is that proceed on with the number you have. That's where it begins, because many people are doubting Thomas's really. They want to see, what does this thing look like? What is this thing you guys have been talking about? And therefore, when you start it with the 6, the 5, and that's why I've insisted on the smallness, even 1 or 2 people who understand this thing and they can be able to go through a journey with it, then start with that small number, and slowly these guys will be able to join in. The same thing happens when you even start with a training. You'd do training. Probably I missed out what the training was all about, but I know Bob Moffitt and Darryl Miller have developed a beautiful tool called the Samaritan Strategy, or Disciple Nation Alliance, which has been used to help churches, people who've gone through theological training and working as pastors, to know how do you mobilize churches, but also to help them to understand their communities and the role of the church and the role of the community within that specific community. Simply because the people who come to the church are the community themselves. They are not separate from that community. And therefore the church and the community are one and the same thing. And of course, after that basic training has always been done, you can probably go, I know you've talked about theological reflection, and I could recall the pastoral cycle, which again, I've taught in the past. And so people always, the question you always have for the pastors is, are they one with the community or they're separate with the community? And whichever answer comes in is okay. It's a good starting point. Then you help them to immerse or to incarnate in that community and have a deep understanding of what goes on through situational analysis. Situational analysis is always the second stage in that pastoral cycle. So when they engage with it, for me, I always divided it into 2. I did a physical map. We did a physical map of what the church considers to be, because the question has been, what is the community? And many churches define their communities either as parishes or as, and they have the boundaries, they can define those boundaries. So can they draw that boundary, which they consider to be their space? Which other churches are in that space? Are they already in conversation or engagement, or they are not in conversation? So that becomes a good starting point. Then you can reflect on the issues emerging from that map, but also social mapping. You reflect on them theologically, because the pastors and the churches are also comfortable with something which is birthed from the scriptures and have a very strong scriptural foundation. So that, Philemon, we can run away from the word project, because projectism pushes you back to the dichotomy. You can build ministry around it, and ministry is long lasting. Projects are defined by time frames. Okay? And people's lives are also not defined by time frame, but people move from one step to another. So I think once you have that, then they can move to a pastoral plan. So they do a pastoral plan based on the things which have emerged from their physical and social analysis. What do they think is core to them, which they want to engage together with in that specific? So that becomes a good starting point from what I can see.
Thank you, Alvin.
So-
Other comments? Let's hear from some of the people perhaps haven't had a chance to comment yet. Janice, Viv? Any comments you wish to make?
I think it's Viv here. I think that we have a question that was given to us, which is the wider issue of community. There is the process of internal community development, but at the moment we've faced a shock where the internal economic structures of the community have been destroyed. The economics of the slums, particularly in the poor communities, have essentially disappeared. And we have situations of starvation in some cities. So in that context, while the internal development is an ongoing process, we also have to look at the church globally. And there's a question there on the agenda of how do you make the connections so that the global church can at this point give? We had the business as mission guys come in and say, we don't want to give, we want to invest. And I thought, no, this is not the time for investment. This is the time for giving. This is the time for just money going in to meet an emergency need. So while we're working on the longer term processes all the way through this, we've got to keep working on those longer term processes. Right now we have to deal with a shock as well. And I think the Cameroonian brothers have been asking, how do we make those connections? So I've been thinking about it for these last weeks. I put out a call to some of my friends to become COVID beggars, to become Franciscan beggars. Didn't get a big response. But the son of a brother in Uganda, I've worked with the brother in Uganda for a few years. His son found a way into the US illegally and then became legal. And so he has a business back in Uganda. So he went to his church and said, look, we've got this need, I'm going to give, would you like to help? Each time he sends the money back to his people in Uganda, he sends it to his business, 3 of his workers. They take it at night quietly, without letting anybody know who they are, find those who are in need, and give the food to those families. Every night, 3-5 families. They take a video of one of the families, put it back on the website that he's created to communicate back to the donor, this is the family that we helped. It's a very simple process. Now, what I want to say with this one particular Franciscan beggar is that he has come from Uganda, he knows Uganda, he's in the West, he can speak into the church. And so basically we're setting up processes outside of the existing agencies because the existing agencies already have their hands full with their existing networks. And so one of my questions for the Cameroonian brothers is, your church, your network is much wider than the Cameroons. There are many Cameroonians in other nations. Who are your people in other nations? Because they are your best advocates. You can't depend on the people on this call where we've got big organizations because they're struggling to find donors. But your people have a lot of connections already. So the question is, how can you leverage those connections? And maybe impolite in asking such a question.
I think the question is not impolite at all. The United Nations did an analysis, I think it was 2017, and analyzed the diaspora and how much money goes from the diaspora to countries. And the Sri Lankan leads, so the Lankan Evangelical Development Service, they have actually used their numbers. And if they would just collect from the money that families are sending back home and would just take 10%, all the development work would be financed within the churches, because it's billions of money that the diaspora sends back to their families, but that money never occurs in any programs, never occurs in any church outreach in the local community, because it just goes from one family to the other family. And one of our fellows with the Sri Lankan community, he is walking around in the Sri Lankan communities and he sees these boys not working, driving fancy bikes, and he asks them how they afford them. And it's the aunt in the States that is financing that. So I agree with you, Viv. It's not an impolite question. It is happening.
I just want to, I don't know what word to say. To say that it's happening, and to give you two examples. Sometime last year, 2019, before the COVID thing came, I worked with some traditional rulers, Cameroon traditional rulers who are in the US. And we were able to give assistance to 100 internally displaced families in Yaoundé and Douala. They collected the money. They sent it to myself and 5 or 6 other people. And we sat down and figured out how to use it, what to distribute. We bought the things, invited those families. For those in Yaoundé, they came to my church, and we centered the whole service of that morning around them and bought them various items like food and soap and things like that, and gave it to them in the name of these traditional rulers out in the US. And it was helpful. This morning, we are in a discussion, but this one now is people in my own area of origin, not with the church, but they're discussing if they can contribute money and build a community hospital there. And that is like what you are saying, trying to move from just sending money to families, but doing it in a way that it helps the community. This same group of people have contributed money in the past and constructed pipe-borne water in some villages, public toilets in some villages, and now are talking about trying to do a community hospital. But the difficulty is that this particular group I'm talking about, when I did a devotional and posted there, they immediately told me to take it off because it is not a religious organization and they do not want any direct Christian influence. So when you get there now to partner with you as church, they will tell you that this place is open to churches, open to Muslims. Just stay away. We want to do our thing. Again, taking back to what we started discussing about how community views church. So there are people who can cooperate. And in this particular project that we have had, I remember that 2 months ago, we told ourselves, please send information to the people you know out of Cameroon. Let's see whether we can raise the $9,000 that we need to be able to reach the 100 families that we wanted. And some of us have gotten out to people and shared the vision to them. Maybe they're still going to contribute, but right now they have not yet responded.
When you're working,
oh, go ahead.
When you're working with politicians, you have to always let them get the credit, right?
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And
I thought that was a helpful point, Vivid, and reminding us that the connection between the Cameroon Coalition, the Cameroon Group, and the rest of the world is not only through networks like Micah, WA, and others, or through NGOs, but through their connection to the diaspora, that in a sense they have their own international network. It may not be well connected, but there's another opportunity for building relationships and then perhaps being able to better engage that group.
Dependency exists when you have an urbanization process. It can be negative, but it can also be godly. So looking at what are the flows, but it's true for Lehman. It's if you get 2% response, you're doing very well. So it's really a question: how do we maximize that response and find those 2% who really have the passion and the heart?
Yeah. So Philemon and Ben Victor, what I'm hearing from Alvin and Viv and others is that the practical work is, while being mindful of those exposed to the pandemic, those who are hungry, also beginning to build relationships, focusing on those, however small the number may be, that have a sense of larger community, wanting to connect to that community and begin to build on that as you are also doing this other ministry work, and beginning to expand their sense of who they are in the community, the church as the community, and facilitating their work.
I think, David, we are working on that, and then it's taking time. I know people are very different. We are so divided denominationally, and then it's not easy to bring people together. We are working on that, and the task is given to church leaders like myself and other one, and we have the opportunity to meet top leaders, but they want to carry their own program, and they don't really see the necessity of having it combined and project for all of us. Because I think some want to have it as a trophy that they have done, but we want to be together to do something that will be a demonstration that as a church we can work together to serve the community.
Yeah, that is very much the challenge. So John, Ben, Victor, Philemon, did you have other questions for our group today?
Rather than talk about other questions, I would like to try to do a summary of what I have heard, like what we need to do, so that I see whether we are on the same page. Is that okay?
Oh, very good.
Okay, so I've heard, first of all, that it will be good for us to try to get some more partners, especially in trying to reach out, particularly in terms of relief, especially Cameroonians out of Cameroon, to see what we can do. Secondly, I have heard that for sensitizing and using the church to do community, we should maybe identify one church or two and do an example with them of getting out just what we are saying, the church as a catalyst within that community, and see what they can do, so that that becomes like an example that can be used in motivating other churches to be involved. I don't know if I heard it correctly. And then the third thing then is doing like seminar to get church leaders to understand what we are talking about and be involved. And that even if those who will be available is a small number, we should work with that number to see if they can understand it and apply, so that we have a multiplied examples within the community for other churches to copy. That's what I've heard. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Feedback for Philemon?
Good summary. Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
I would say you're correct. I think you also need to acknowledge that this will take time. Transformation does not happen quickly.
Yes.
Okay.
And you don't build those relationships overnight. That's a significant long-term investment. Yeah.
So should I also assume that when we get to where we need help, maybe like getting those churches, the few that are available, and working with them to cast the vision for them to understand, we can count on you as our partners?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, if I may make a suggestion, Grace Durnis had to drop off, but Grace has been working with us at WA on some case studies, and she's done a very good one on the Sri Lankan Alliance. And it's an interesting case study that I think is very applicable to what you're doing in Cameroon, because the Christian community is a minority community in Sri Lanka, and they had to work across faith groups as well as across the island geographically and build relationships. And it took years for them to do that. But they have become a force in Sri Lanka. And so Grace has some interesting insights into how it was that they were successful. So Grace has agreed to talk with the group about her findings, and also working on recruiting Godfrey, who heads the Sri Lankan Alliance, and have a conversation where then Godfrey can comment on or expand upon the observations that Grace has from looking at the work they were doing. So I thought that might be an interesting next step for everyone. Let's look at a study of a successful example of building those relationships, and the Alliance really helping to drive that. And then in the meantime, allowing some time for the folks in Cameroon to apply the things we're talking about. And then when you're ready, come back together with us. And let's certainly hear about your good work, but also hear about the challenges that you inevitably will encounter, and then how we might be able to think together with you about some of those challenges. So Philemon, how does that sound to you as far as next steps?
That's fine. I think the Sri Lanka model will be very important, because process is important. How we start and how we get on is something we need to define.
Exactly.
And having a model to use and maybe adapt will be most helpful for us, so that we don't invent the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And Alvin, just wanted to check with you. We've really appreciated your input. Did you have any closing thoughts for today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a quick one. I think another thought which came across as we kept on speaking, actually two issues. One, in the communities also, it's sometimes helpful to find out what is the community perception of a church in that specific area. You'll get surprised at what they think. And sometimes that even helps that specific church to know how to respond even better. Because sometimes we focus more on the church reaching to the community. But what do the community think and believe? Case studies and stories around community perception about a church in their local community. Mm-hmm. Two, I agree with Philemon. What happens is that it's dissecting this to looking at this from two perspectives. You have what you call a relief situation, which they have in Cameroon. There are no two ways about relief situations, because you can't start a development process with people who've been uprooted from their homes. It will not work. So what they need at that moment is immediate help and support in terms of food and different things. And so the question for them is, how much can they be able to raise locally? Because I'm a strong believer in connecting external resources to local resources, so that external resources are not coming to replace the local resources, but coming to strengthen the local resources. Sometimes if it's completely from external sources, then it replaces the ability of people to mobilize their internal local resources. So partnerships for adding on to the local resources becomes very critical. Yeah, so those are the two comments. Oh, there's a third one, the question of ecumenism, because I heard Jean Lebong talk about some people don't want to come together with others. Again, that process takes a bit of time because churches and denominations have whether real or unreal perceptions about each other. Some of them are deeply historical. And sometimes when they meet, they actually realize there are no issues between the two of them. It's only that those lines have been divided over a long period of time. But you break those lines slowly and softly as you get along. But you need somewhere to start. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. Any other closing comments? Anything anybody was just waiting for an opportunity to share? And Deborah, anything from a Micah perspective that you wanted to share before we finish?
Thank you, David. It's a little bit early on my second day to be making pronouncements. I've got the attitude of, look, listen, and learn. But I think certainly I was very excited by the conversation, and I think it's highly relevant, and particularly in terms of the WEA and Micah, it's about how we are able to collaborate as Christian development organizations and congregations and understand our respective callings within this mission of God. So thank you for having me. It's been great to be part of the discussion today.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. And thank you all. I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your commitment. And again, I'm going to send you all, probably by tomorrow, a link to just a very short survey just to get your thoughts about the work of this group as we go forward. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'm going to stop the recording.